Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh set for tomorrow, and his confirmation hanging in the balance. Judge Kavanaugh has just spoken out. Writing on the opinion page of the Wall Street Journal, he addresses the tone of his testimony last week, which some, including one retired justice, have suggested should bar him from the high court. Here are two key passages. He wrote, "At times, my testimony, both in my opening statement and in response to questions, reflected my overwhelming frustration at being wrongly accused, without corroboration of horrible conduct completely contrary to my record and character. My statement and answers also reflected my deep distress at the unfairness of how this allegation has been handled." Judge Kavanaugh continues to write, "I was very emotional last Thursday, more so than I have ever been. I might have been too emotional at times. I know that my tone was sharp and I said a few things I should not have said. I hope everyone can understand that I was there as a son, husband, and dad. I testified with 5 people foremost in my mind: my mom, my dad, my wife, and most of all, my daughters." So this just was posted. Joining us now is Ann Milgram, Rich Lowry, Kirsten Powers, and Tara Setmer. Kirsten, you read the op-ed. What do you make of what Judge Kavanaugh has written and the reasons behind him writing it now?
Well, I think he's probably writing this because he realized that there are people who are saying, including 2 people who had supported his nomination, who've withdrawn their support over the issue of judicial temperament. And so I think he's trying to do some cleanup here. I know conservatives have argued that this is a normal way to react when you're under attack and your whole life is, being criticized and some pretty awful things are being said about you. But I have to say, I think that the way you see what someone's temperament is to see how they act when they're under pressure. And it's not when people are being nice to them, because everybody can be calm and have a nice temperament when people are being nice to them. Everyone can't be and nice when they're under attack. And it doesn't really matter how any of us would respond, because we're not up for the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land. It matters how he would respond, we have higher expectations for temperament for Supreme Court justices than most people in the country.
It's interesting, Rich, because Judge Kavanaugh made a big deal of the fact that the prepared statement he gave, which is what really caught, I think, a lot of people's attention with the tone of what he was saying, and not only the words, but also how he said it. He made a big deal as he started his testimony that he had written it. Nobody else had seen it except, I believe it was a clerk of his. These were his words. Those were not off-the-cuff remarks. Those were something he had thought out, he had planned. Is it now disingenuous for him?
Well, one, that's true what he says about how closely held these remarks were, and he wrote them himself, and they're very personal. I think as a practical political matter, if he hadn't come out very strong and very passionate, he'd be dead. He just would have been dead. You have to go back in time and remember how we all felt after Dr. Ford's testimony and how he instantly changed the political dynamic around this. And this is inherently a political process, so you have to pay attention to that. And the judicial temperament issue, I mean, we have ample evidence of a judicial temperament in 200, 300, whatever the decisions are they wrote on the D.C. Circuit. And when you're a judge, you're adjudicating, you're a neutral party to other people's disputes, and you adjudicate them. This is completely different, where his reputation was being torn to shreds in the most disgraceful manner, being accused of things up to and including being party to a gang rape ring in suburban Maryland County. So I think any fair-minded person, any human person would understand his reaction. Now, he got too hot. I think in the Q&A, you saw that particularly when he was asking, questions badgering questions of the senators. I think after the second, I believe it was second break, so I'm going to sit back. I'm going to apologize to Senator Klobuchar in real time. So I don't think that was appropriate, and I think he was better from that point. But this, the sexual misconduct allegations are either at a standstill or falling apart. So it's become about alleged lies in his testimony and about temperament. And he's trying to address this, especially with Senator Jeff Flake in mind.
And do you...
I disagree with almost everything Rich said, though I respect him enormously. But look, there are a few things. One, the ends don't justify the means. Even if your reputation is on the line, this is the United States Supreme Court. This is a hallowed institution that makes the law of the land. You do not get to sit on that court, in my view, by going up and yelling at United States senators by writing a speech for the first 10 minutes where he talks about, I'm so qualified, I went to Yale, I worked so hard. None of that would negate the fact that he could have still engaged in a sexual assault, right? And so he went on for 10 minutes talking about himself. It took 10 or 15 minutes before he even mentioned the victim. And to me, when it comes to the Supreme Court, and this is hurting the institution of the Supreme Court, this feels also very political to me, that he's now, justices don't write op-eds. Justices sit and they don't speak other than through their opinions. So, you know, I'm troubled by so many parts of this, but this to me does not make it better, this apology.
It's interesting, Tara, because when you read it, and I encourage people to read it, which is posted by the Wall Street Journal, you know, he says he regrets some of the things he says, went too far, doesn't really go into details, but in that opening statement, I mean, he was talking about a conspiracy in part hatched by the Clintons and that this was retribution. Does what he say now, does that, for you, does it convince you that he has the temperament?
No, absolutely not, because if you made the point before I did that those were prepared statements, that he wrote that. So it wasn't in the heat of the moment. That tells me that he wrote that, read it, went there, and felt as though that was an appropriate way to conduct himself in the hearing. No, so this is like sorry after you got caught. He's doing this as a PR move to try to convince people that, no, I'm actually not unhinged and I can control my temper. I'm not a partisan hack. I'm none of those things that you saw me behave like a week ago, because he's been criticized justifiably by people within his own profession. When you have 1,200 law professors and, you know, coming out, and the ABA coming out, and now Justice Stevens, former Justice Stevens, coming out saying, this temperament, this is a problem for the Supreme Court. He knew he had to do a cleanup job to try to convince folks that, no, I'm really not like that. I will be an impartial arbiter of the law. But I've had my other issues with the way Kavanaugh has behaved and the way that the Republicans have behaved with this entire incident. But his behavior during that hearing, in and of itself, was disqualifying. You cannot be that much of a partisan and bring that to the Supreme Court and expect people to think the integrity of the court has been maintained. You just can't.
One of the things he writes, he says, I hope everyone can understand that I was there as a son, husband, and dad, and that his main audience, was his, I think he said his wife, his kids, and his parents. Testified with 5 people foremost in my mind: my mom, my dad, my wife, and most of all, my daughters. Is that disingenuous? I mean, first of all, he was there. It wasn't testimony in front of his family. His family knows him. It was clearly an attempt. I mean, it was a message to the president. It was a public statement in front, a televised statement. Is it disingenuous to say he was there speaking as a husband and a dad?
No,
it's
I
relatable,
mean, his
but
reputation is being torn to shreds in the most public manner possible in front of the people he loves most. Again, any human being, if you just subtract partisanship from it, has to understand the pain and agony he's been going through in this process.
That moment, that was a job interview, wasn't it?
No, but look, if he had been passionless and cold, everyone would have said, you're passionate and cold, you're guilty. He's passionate, everyone says you're too passionate. Now he apologizes and said he was at times too passionate. Everyone's, oh, you're apologizing. You can't do that either.
Rich,
they want to get him coming and going and coming and going because they've opposed him from the beginning and want to use any means to destroy him.
Isn't there something in the middle, though?
Right.
I mean, I think you're kind of picking out like these two extremes, and even saying everyone's opposed him from the beginning. The people that Tara just mentioned weren't opposing him from the beginning. There are people who are coming out who actually supported him.
There's no Democrat on that committee who's going to support him.
But we're not talking about the Democrats on the committee. We're talking about other people.
They're the
outside
ones who've
of the political
this allegation. They held it for the 11th hour.
Rich, let me finish. Outside of the political process, it's not this idea that what you just said, like the only people who would see this way are partisans, is just not true.
So you don't have any sympathy for him.
Let me finish. I had never said anything negative about Kavanaugh. And I have said before that if this was a Democrat, and I know you know this is a thing, I know that you know this, I would be saying the same thing. There are some people who look at this and say, this is not a person who, I certainly wouldn't feel good going up in front of him in the Supreme Court after the things that he said. And I also don't even understand the idea that somehow this was something he was doing for his family. I don't understand why anyone would feel reassured seeing their father screaming and yelling.